there. Welcome to another episode of Chasing the Vision. This is episode 8, if you're keeping up with us. These have been so fun to record. And if you caught the last one, we actually got to do it live and in person together when we were at the Violent Executive Summit a few months ago. And so now we are heading into episode 8. We are talking about transactions and transitions. If you're just joining us here, there's a whole bunch of episodes before this talking about owner involvement, the roles of leadership and management in a company, your company's identity and what that is, what it means, how important it is, industry and market conditions, how to make it through those. This has been an interesting year for all of that, for sure. Your customer base, financial cleanliness, consultants, which these gentlemen are. So, all right, JT and Tim, welcome back to the conversation. I'm excited to talk about transactions versus transitions and what that means for restoration companies in general. So, before we kick it off, do a quick refresher for people who are new here. JT, I'll kick it to you first to do a quick refresher, and then Tim, you're next.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. My name is JT, Exit Strategies 360. I specialize in the valuation sales of restoration and trade service companies, and I do that nationally. I've been doing it now for 15 years in this space.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Tim?
JT. I guess I'm your partner in crime, Tim Hull with
That's
Viola.
right.
We we're small business management consultants. We do specialize also in the cleaning and restoration space, but also other service industries. So, 37 years young, I guess we've been doing this and having a blast.
Perfect. Okay, JT, kick us off on this transactions versus transitions conversation. What does that really mean? What are you talking about here when you talk about these two different terms that people might get mixed up in their head?
Well, it's an interesting concept. Over the last 23, 4 years since I've been doing this, there's really two sides. And one is very transaction oriented, and it's sort of the day-to-day grind. And what I mean by that is it's the leases, the lines of credit, the onboarding, collections, sales, operations, it's training meetings, all the things that go into a successful restoration company, right? And they need to be in place to be successful. And then what I've learned over the last 20 years is there's a transition side, and think of it as being a real personal side to these owners. And it's the internal skill set and development that has to happen as a business starts. We know that when a business starts, it's one set of skills, and then as it grows, it's another. And then to be strategic and make yourself sort of irrelevant, hopefully, or to maintain that strategic element, that's another set of skill set. And if that individual isn't transitioning and growing through that process, it's a real grind. And it's obvious at certain points of development in key growth steps. And I'm sure, Tim, you know where most of those are. I've got my own hunches, of course, but they're pretty obvious there. It's very obvious when you go to sell a business. And pretty easy to talk about the transactional stuff. So let me just circle back to that quick. But Tim, I might just kick it straight to you on the transaction side. It seems like many of my clients, and I'm sure many of yours as well, they bump up against this 1.5 million, 1.8 million in sales. And from my seat, that's really where they have to learn to start duplicating themselves and delegating, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And, that's when I start to referring consultants because they get stuck there. Is that your case as well?
Yeah, JT, we actually have a name for that, and I can't take credit for it, but Chuck had wrote a book several years ago called Stage 2 Stall and Overcoming Stage 2 Stall. So that's the term that we use when we see clients kind of get to that point, and it does typically happen in like that 1.5 million, maybe even a little bit more in today's dollars. But when I see a client that's kind of stuck transactionally in that period, it almost always has to do with operating capital. And closely behind that, of course, is the resource side, because you can't have the resources if you don't have the capital to do it. Mm-hmm. But man, I mean, it's a marked difference, because they're used to being that owner operator type, like you talked about, and doing everything themselves. And now all of a sudden we have to hire employees. We need to acquire assets. We need to put things into place that help run the business. And it all costs money and it takes time. So it's a pretty common place for people to get stuck. And we, the transactional side, I don't want to call it like hard business versus soft business, but if you think about transactionally, that being kind of the hard side of business, it's very mechanical in nature. So you can put things into place. You can put procedures and processes and all kinds of things in place to help take care of that. And of course, you can go out and find funding. But the two are the two are tied together too. I mean, the transitional side that you mentioned, you got to think differently about what your role is as an owner in a business. And interesting, we kind of refer to this as a kind of a life cycle that an entrepreneur goes through. That starts off in the business is all about them. So it's me, it's a me thing. It's all about me as an owner. But eventually they have to kind of get out of that if they want to get to the next growth stage and start thinking in terms of we. So it's me as the owner and my employees too. So now it's we. Eventually, we like to try to get them to the them side of things where they're now thinking in terms of this being the company as an entity in and of itself, separate from the owner.
How important is that transition from me to them in this whole Chasing the Vision series that we're doing here? This is kind of a question for both of you, but that has to be a big part of it. I guess it depends on the owner's vision, but especially if you're going to sell or you're looking for the next step or whatever, that transition from it being all about you to them, what does that look like? How important is that?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead. Go
Michelle,
ahead, Tim.
yeah, well, just to kind of clarify to make sure we're all on the same page here. And I've seen clients try to go from me to them immediately and they skip the we
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Yes.
That's an important piece. You can't just start a business, run it, and then hand it over to somebody and say, all right, now this is yours to take care of, and I'm out of the picture. There is a transition there, like what we're talking about, where you've got roles and responsibilities that have to be passed on and expectations need to be set. So yeah, that incremental movement towards it is very important.
JT, you have something you want to add there?
Yeah, from my seat, when there's a transition, it takes a team. Especially the we to them, as Tim is calling it. That team is everything, and you can't do it all alone. Both Tim and I'm sure you get these phone calls as well, Tim, or at least your office does. People are so frustrated. They're wearing 15 or 17 different hats, and they're working 75 hours a week, and they just can't do it all. And it's got to turn to we, or you lose your sanity. I mean, that's really the end result. And when it comes time to selling, sort of that final step is buyers want to buy a team. And if there isn't a team and it's mostly an owner, we've done an episode on that, the owner dependency. And if it's too dependent on an owner, it's really difficult to sell. That's sort of the short summary answer, is that there's got to be at least a we and hopefully a them. If we can get to a them, it's much more sellable than if it's just a me.
Yes. Okay. All right. So JT, touch a little bit more on, Tim was just talking about stage two stall and where a lot of business owners get caught. So what helps them kind of get through a tough transition phase of a business?
Well, this is probably Tim's lane. I'll just step on his toes here for a minute and he
Okay.
can pick up the pieces. How's that? I mean, from my seat, when owners call and they're stuck, sometimes they feel like selling is the only option. And that isn't my only option. I mean, this is what I do, but I never encourage someone to sell if they're not ready. So I talk about a vision and the vision that they had when they started versus where it is now. Those skill sets of growing a company are so different than they were starting a company. When you're starting, your goal is just to survive. And as you grow a company, it can grow so many different directions, especially today with all the specialists out there, the specialty areas of focus. And so we talk about this clarity of vision and we talk about delegation. And I have to smile when I talk about delegation. I'll talk to owners about that and they'll say, well, I told them how to do it. I wish they just do it right. And we all know that's not delegation. So it's, from my seat, it's about getting these owners out of their comfort zone and doing some things they haven't done before. And what they really want is a clear path ahead. And I mean, show me what that growth looks like and show me what I should be doing. And if they're humble enough to ask, there's so many questions out there. There's so much information out there. I mean, Tim, your office is probably totally different than it was 10 or 15 years ago, just with the level of information you're able to access. So for me, it's trying to get a fundamental mind shift into these owners that they should just be looking at it differently and hopefully getting out of their way.
JT, I want to come back. You made a comment about, kind of refocusing and clarifying the vision too, and how important that is. And you're right. I mean, we can look at ourselves, you and I both, and look at our organizations today and go back and see what they looked like 10, 15 years ago and think, well, man, where did we go from there to here and how did we get here? So I think we speak from from experience in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these ways too. At some point, I know myself, I kind of woke up one morning and went, wait a second. I don't have to focus on giving clients advice anymore. I've got to worry about how do you grow a consultancy.
Mm-hmm.
You look at yourself and you go, okay, there were three or four of us sitting around a table, pontificating great business advice one day, and the next thing you know, you wake up and you got 20 employees, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of mouths to feed.
And Tim, that it hasn't taken a toll at all. You look good for 82, buddy. You really look good.
Like I said before, it's platinum blonde.
That's right.
Oh, I love it. Okay. All right. So, Tim, keep going here. Do most owners that you talk to want to face transactional challenges or transitional challenges? And does it depend on the owner and personality type? Also, I have to ask that.
Yeah, no, it does. It definitely does. And I can tell you, they all want to deal with the transactional side. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
wants to deal with the transition side.
Yeah.
And have to, look themselves in the mirror and go, how did I get gray? But yeah, I mean, everybody kind of goes to the mechanical side of business and think, all right, well, there's a process or procedure to ease my pain, fix my problem, allow my business to go from here to here, or, whatever they want to do. But it is dependent on the owner. It depends on a lot of times what their strengths are. And some of them do have strengths on the transactional side where, they come from an accounting background or they come from a sales and marketing or
Mm-hmm.
business development background. But I'd say by and large, they all fit into that tradesman category at some point. They were skilled with their hands at some point, whether or not that was a technical restorer or, a carpenter that happened to be, talented with construction trade knowledge and things like that. And sometimes they ignore the acumen side of things, the business acumen side that's necessary to really understand, why do I need clean books? What's the purpose of an organizational chart or policy and procedure in my company? So for us, that's an education piece. So we can get into that later. But on the transition side of things, really, I mean, that's just them getting out of their way and recognizing, having that epiphany moment. Hey, I'm not just a restorer. I'm not just a carpenter or a painter or a plumber. I'm a businessman, and I've got to get serious about running a business so that I can act that transitional change as well as the transactional change.
That makes good sense. JT, you have any take on this and the owners that you talk
It,
to and whether they prefer transition?
yeah, I'll echo what Tim said. I won't be able to add a whole lot to that. He's 100% right. The ones that I think are the most successful, and I mentioned the word humble a few minutes ago, and I'm going to say it again. As business owners, we're supposed to have all the answers, right? The buck always stops on our desk, and we're paid to have answers. We've got a lot riding on us having answers, and when we don't, it's sometimes hard for these owners to say, "Listen, I need some help in this area. I'm going to make a phone call or two." But the most successful owners that are able to sort of shorten that learning curve, they get on the phone right away with a peer group, with their consultant, with their advisor or a mentor, and say, "Listen, I'm struggling here. Help me out." And answers can instantly collapse a conversation, and they can implement some things right away. So Tim's right. If you're of that mindset and can ask for answers, the world's your oyster at that point. It's the people who don't ask, that think they've got it all, 100% satisfied and under control. They're the ones that tend to struggle because they're not willing to learn and be coachable.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, are there other places that you find companies stall, other than you talked about the stage 2 stall a little bit ago, but are there other places that you see restoration companies typically stall, and what are some of the reasons that companies do get stuck there, and what does it take to get through those?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a big one, and we could make a whole episode out of this, Michelle.
Yeah.
So I'll try to keep it as short and sweet as I can. It does come back to operating capital, though, but there's another dynamic going on there, and this usually pertains to growing businesses. So, when a business goes through kind of a maturing stage and it hits that 3, 4, $5 million range, a lot of weird things start happening. You have a need for middle management layers that you didn't have before. The business generally has enough employees that you need more policy, practice, and procedure than you used to. So there's a lot of reinvestment that's necessary. Some companies also look at geographic expansion, capital asset purchases, those kinds of things. And what ends up happening is the business starts to consume cash faster than it can produce it. Not saying they're not making money at the bottom line, because they are, but the bottom line margins have a tendency to be smaller from a percentage standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
than what they were previously. And it's not, I call it no man's land. So when you're in no man's land, it's generally, let's say 5 to 10 or 12 million. You're just, it's like, training for a marathon. You can't get enough calories to feed the system. You can't get enough cash to feed the system to grow, with the organization. After you get through no man's land, it's a little bit easier, and you have a whole other set of challenges that occur. But that's another area where I think companies stall out is during that period, and they really have to make a conscious decision. Either I'm gonna steal a preview from the next one, maybe idle on the exit ramp a little bit there, or do I want to continue to go through and grow through no man's land and on to the next stage of growth?
Do you find that there's a place go ahead, JT?
Well, I was going to say, I want to interject one comment there. For those owners who are listening, I don't want them to think that this no man's land is from like 3 or 4 million to 12 and that they're going to be stuck there for 5 years. I agree with your numbers, Tim, but some of that from my seat is based on whether you're mitigation only or full service, whether you're residential or commercial. That window can be pretty nebulous based on your focus and how quickly you're willing to learn and get through it. So I don't want anybody panicking who's listening to it saying, I'm going to be stuck for the next 5 years. So but I agree with the range. I totally do, but it can be a little fluid based on your focus.
Right. And the advice we give clients too on the backside is when you're kind of getting to that spot, there isn't a marker. It's not like, oh, we're at 4.89 million. We better prepare ourselves because no man land's coming.
Right.
If it's 5.2 or it's 3.6, you'll know it when you get there because you'll start seeing the cash going out faster than it's coming in. But what we tell people is it's kind of like going down a bumpy road. The faster you drive across those potholes, the less you feel them. But if you try to go through it and hit each one, you're in for years worth of pain.
Yeah.
Hit the
Agreed.
gas.
Damage the car on your way through. Yes. Okay. So that was kind of talking about the company level. Let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about owner level. Where do owners get stuck during some of these growth and transitional stages? Tim, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, they get stuck because they're kind of in their own way. I mean, they just have a hard time letting go. And look, those are entrepreneurs. I mean, that's their characteristic by nature. JT, I think you used the comment earlier, the buck stops on their desk all the time. And that's how they treat things. That's how they've always treated them. But that's what's gotten them to where they are today. So the thought or the idea of putting a management team in place and not only giving them the expectations of performance, but also the authority to make decisions on behalf of the owner, it's a scary proposition. Especially when you've got that alpha personality, the fact that you're going to pay somebody else to make decisions on your behalf is pretty tough. So trying to get them out of that micromanagement and kind of strike a balance. And look, I'm not an advocate of laissez-faire management either. You still have to keep your arms around thing. I was just down at the Alacrity conference a couple months ago, and we were all there together. But I did a presentation on micro and macro management, and it was amazing the feedback that I got from the folks in the audience. And as soon as you say macro management or laissez-faire management, they're going, you're talking about giving them rope to hang themselves with. Yeah, so we got kind of sidelined on a conversation there. But I do believe there's a balance during that transition. You can't just all of a sudden one day come in and say, all right, you guys are in charge now, and oh, by the way, here's my expectations. You have to kind of ease into that.
Yeah. So, okay, JT, step into this a little bit more. You've said the phrase, owners, I believe, are never more present than when they're preparing to sell. Can you add some color to that one?
Yeah, what happens is this transition, this personal side of things kind of catches them right between the eyes when they least expect it. And when an owner grows a business for 10, 20, 30 years and it's in their blood, sweat, and tears, right? And when they call me, the first thing I'm trying to figure out is, are they tired or are they ready to sell? And you'd be surprised how many people are just tired. They don't recognize the industry anymore from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. And let's face it, it's changed. And they don't like it where it is now based on where it was. So that's the first thing I'm trying to figure out. But then the next layer is they say they want to retire. And both Tim and I have worked with many, many clients who could retire multiple times over financially, but they can't retire emotionally. You just can't do it.
Mm.
And it's fascinating to me, and I could tell stories, and Tim, I'm sure you've got a bunch too. When you're working with someone who, some of these guys will tell you flat out, we've got 5 homes, we've got millions in the bank, we, could have retired 25 years ago. And then you start going down the road with them about what retirement looks like, and they have no idea. They couldn't tell you the first thing about what retirement looks like for them. So then I start this process about this transition, and I start to ask what life looks like without their business. And they really can't tell me. And I ask them, where's their landing pad? I'm a firm believer that owners need a place to land, especially in this crazy industry. It's just sort of all inclusive. And I say, are you going to be a president's spouse or grandparent? Are you going to pick up hobbies again? What is it that you're going to do? And sometimes I get this deer in the headlight look. Yeah, there was just a client in the Midwest that I said, what's your favorite hobby? And he said, fishing. I fish all the time. And I said, when was the last time you fished? And I have to say this with a smile on my face. He says, well, must have been about 12, 13 years ago now. And I said, your favorite hobby is 12 or 13 years ago. And his wife was in this meeting, and right away she piped up and said, he has forgotten what it's like to have a life outside of work. And she was dead serious. And so this transition, most people don't even think about it because they're too busy going to work every day. But if you can take a step back and look at how the transition of selling is going to affect you personally and where it's going to place you post sale, even with a 2 or 3 year transition, which is a whole nother topic about working after you sell, it's got to be thought through. And if you don't, if when you stare down the barrel of retirement and it's a blank, there's nothing there, it means you're probably not ready. It's well deserving of some thought for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, can we go off on like a little bit of a rabbit?
Please.
JT, I'm curious. So
Sure.
You brought up a lot of great points, and you talk about the owners who know what retirement looks like and those who don't. And I'm one of those ones that fall into the latter category.
Sure.
Like, say retirement, I'm like, I have no idea what that means. But is there a correlation, in your opinion, between the successfulness, whatever that successfulness looks like, whether they're continuing to run a successful business or they sell, but is there a correlation between how people view kind of the end game, those who wouldn't be able to retire even if you force them, and those who have, pictures of golfing and fishing every day and things like that? Is there?
There probably is, and I might not do the answer justice, but the correlation is for those who view their business as a tool to get to retirement, as a cash flow means to get there, they view it as such. And to me, the most successful owners set up their business to be strategic. They don't set it up dependent on themselves. And when it's set up as a tool to get to retirement, they can step out really easy. They really can. When you've probably heard this story, but I've got a client, 140 person firm, Midwest, and he still answers the phone after hours, multiple locations. And I said, why do you do that? And he said, well, I've just got to make sure it's done right. Got 150 other people that could probably do it. So that guy is probably never going to retire. He just can't. And so, yeah, there is a correlation. I think it's how you view your business and the tool that it's there for. And I think with those with an eye on the prize for retirement, it's easier for them emotionally to go through this, the me, we, them stages and ultimately get there.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition, Michelle, kind of like into the next set of topics. But, to me, what I took out of that, JT, was that, that guy that's still answering the phone, you don't want to be the guy that feels like he still has to answer the phone. You want to be the guy that can choose to answer the phone if he wants to. I'm answering the phone because I want to, not because I have to, or I feel I have to.
Yeah.
Well, and I think on a real personal level, and either one of you can probably back me up on this, as business owners, we're somebody at work. We're respected. We've got answers. We call the shots, and not in an overly egotistical way, but we're there for a reason. We've grown it. We've been successful. And when these owners think about being a former business owner or they retire or they go home, well, maybe your wife tells you it's time to mow the grass or paint the garage or clean up the basement. That's a totally different mindset than being somebody at work. And that's an unappealing thing. Let me say it this way: it's an unappealing place to land if that's where your mind's at. You don't want to go home and be told to mow the lawn. You want to keep being somebody at work. So there's a status piece that goes with it, and owners always underestimate that as well. They really do, and it's you can't tell someone to think about it in advance. I've tried for 15 years, and once they're in the middle of it, then they'll say, "Oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about." And they've almost got to go through it.
So, okay, so you both come at this conversation from different angles, broker, consultant. So, Tim, I'm curious, kind of sending the question to you that you kind of asked JT just now. From the consultant side, how do you help owners that come to you in the mindset of, I know I need to retire, but I have no idea what to do. I don't know that I really want to, but my family wants me to, or XYZ, I need to, but I don't know how or what's next or anything. What's the first step there? How do you help owners that are in that spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it really starts on helping them understand what they want and what it looks like. And like you mentioned, JT, a lot of them really don't know. So
Mm-hmm.
you really, as consultants, I mean, we kind of have to give them some possibilities, at least to start with. That way it gets the mind thinking about, all right, well, maybe I can go and do other things. Maybe I can go into real estate investment, or I can go into consulting, or I can, I can do something meaningful and different. I can be somebody post business. But ultimately, our job as advisors is to set them up with the options. So we always like to tell our clients, Michelle, that it's not our dream. It's their dream. We just help them get there. So to me, it starts with gaining some really good clarity on what that exit strategy might look like, and then help positioning them to the point where they can capitalize and maximize on the return on that investment when the time presents itself.
Mhm. Okay. JT, anything you want to add to that before I toss it to
Yeah,
you the last question?
I think it's a perfect segue into our next episode about this exit ramp and what do we do while we're on it. But it's uh, from my seat when I bring it to their attention, how silly some comments are about, like, back to this fishing example. 13 years ago was the last time he went fishing, yet it was his favorite hobby.
Mhm.
That until they hear it, they don't really, it doesn't register. They just know they haven't been fishing in a while and they think it's been a couple of years. So when you bring it to their attention and you start talking about it, some people, you can see the light bulb go on, and others get a little annoyed at such a simple line of questioning. And I have to navigate that a little carefully. And Tim, I know you ask a lot of questions as well, which is why our offices get along so well. But when you take them down this line of questioning, they have no idea how this relates to selling their business. And it has everything to do with selling their business. They just haven't made the connection yet. And so for me, I point it out, I put it on the radar, ask a few questions, bring it sort of top of mind. As a consultant and advisor, I can't force anyone to do anything. And, we have to rely on them to sort of go down that road by themselves, but we can lead them so far.
Mhm.
And that's what I try to do. From my seat, when that light bulb goes on and they get it, now they're one step closer to being ready to go.
Okay, so as we wrap it up, I'm curious the advice that both of you would give owners from your seats as they're thinking about a transition. Maybe they're in a period where their business either is a little bit stalled or it feels like it's at a good place to sell, or they don't really know what's next. I can think of a couple owners kind of in my sphere that a few years ago were, especially as all the M&A activity was going on, should I sell? And these are people that are more, middle age, not older retirement age. They're even just in the middle and would need maybe a different career after this, but should I sell now? And one person decided not to sell and is now going to have a record year. Another person thought maybe they were going to sell and recently bought another restoration company instead. So, there's different ways that people can go. So, what does the conversation that you have with owners look like when they come to you and say, I don't know, we're in a transition, but I don't know what that transition is? Who wants to take that one first? Tim?
Yeah, I can kick it off. Again, I'm going to come back to gaining clarity on what the end game looks like. And I think if we were to sit here and say, all business owners should try to create a saleable asset out of their business, I think we would be giving bad advice. I mean, at the
Mhm.
end of the day, the statistics still show that only 20 to 30% of small businesses ever sell. Now, fortunately for our service industry businesses, it's higher than that. It's more in the 30 to 40% range. And there's a lot of good reasons why that is the case. I mean, we've got, a fragmented industry for the most part in the service side. So you've got a lot of opportunity for consolidation for outside investors to come in. It's a relatively stable revenue stream. The cash flow is good. The margins are high. I mean, you could go on and on about why this business is attractive, right? But at the end of the day, there's still risk in selling a business too. And the greatest risk to a buyer in the service industry is still the owner. It's always the owner, because you can say the business isn't dependent on them until the cows come home, but if you can't prove that you're not there 365 days a year and you don't write the checks every day, there is a decision that still comes back to that owner's desk at some point. So, you got to get clear on what it looks like at the end and just keep working towards it. The more clarity you have on that, especially as a business matures, the better off you're going to be.
Mm-hmm. JT, anything you want to add to that? The wisdom that you impart on owners?
Oh, well, thank you. I think what I'd like to add is, from my seat, I always ask owners, who are you without your business? And initially, they don't know how to answer that, and they think it's kind of a foolish question. By the time I'm done with a few questions and we go through my process of evaluation analysis, they now understand how the two are connected, and they've got a much better answer. But there's some real crazy stories out there. And just a brief one, I valued a company, this is now 10, 11 years ago, and it's an industry individual that everybody knew. He was in his late 70s and could have retired many, many times over, husband-wife team working in the business. And I had valued it a couple times over a 7-8 year period. And she responded to me on the side saying, I've tried for 7-8 years to retire and quit, and he won't let me. I'm too valuable in the office. And she said, I'm quitting November 1st. This was January. So a couple times throughout that year, she emailed me and she said, I'm talking to my husband about this. I'm laser focused on November 1. You're my witness. I'm turning in my notice October 15th. And granted, they're worth millions and millions. And he made no bones about telling me how many, but it was millions. And October 15th rolls around. She turns in her notice. He was floored. And she said, I've been telling you for a year, I'm going to do this. It was a 2-week notice, and it darn near caused the divorce. I mean, it was terrible. Wow. I was on the phone with both of them multiple times. I went from advisor to a therapist and then back to advisor, and he couldn't take it. 9 months later, he sold. He couldn't run it without her, but she had enough after 7-8 years of trying to retire. So it's that kind of transition you've got to be clear on. And if you're a husband-wife team, it's got to be shared, because a little hint that if you don't have some of the transition details figured out, it will wreak havoc and ruin some of the transaction details in your business. And the transition details are far more prevalent in deals falling apart than transaction details, if that makes sense. The personal side can get in the way and just ruin a good transaction if you don't have a handle on them. So I think if you give it some attention and some thought, you're light years ahead of most.
JT, hearing you say that, I think we ought to do another episode on not owner dependence, but on couple dependencies.
There you go. Yeah, well,
I got some great stories about that as well too. So
yeah, we both have lots of clients with husband-wife teams in this space, and it's a very effective combination. We should do that. Let's put that on the radar.
Yeah, we've actually had a couple that sacrificed the marriage in favor of the business partnership.
Oh, that's tough.
I thought it was real interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, I can think of a few of those as well. I love it. Okay, great conversations. All right, so that's wrapping up this episode. So next episode we are heading into is why it's sometimes good to idle on the exit ramp. Now that we've talked about maybe you're on the exit ramp, sometimes you need to hit the brake a little bit. So that's what we're heading into next. You can find all episodes of Chasing the Vision on the CNR website, on our YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever that may be, and the Exit Strategies 360 website, on the Violand website, violand.com. You can find them everywhere. So we will see you on the next episode. Tim and JT, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.